Well, hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today's conversation is on cultural change within construction, and I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Faye Allen to the Building Podcast. Faye is a director of construction consultancy, JS Held, with 30 years' experience in the sector. Originally trained as a quantity surveyor, Faye now supports clients from across the sector to avoid disputes, both here in the UK and overseas. However, it's her campaigning for better practices and a more productive culture within construction that we're debating here today. And I'm particularly looking forward to exploring the consequences of a new overtly masculine president in the American White House and what that might mean for us in the industry here in the UK. Faye, welcome to the Building Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Not at all. We're looking forward to this one. We start by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves and their roles, to allow listeners a chance to put our conversations in some sort of context. So what should we know about you?
Well, I started training in the UK construction industry when I was 18 officially, to be a quantity surveyor. But before that, I've been going out with my dad. So he had his own estimating and surveying business. So I've worked for a number of contractors. I started with Tri Construction as a young 18-year-old sassy woman. And they paid for me to do day release so that I could study and work at the same time, which was really good because I really didn't fancy full-time education. So I did HNC Bridge year. I went into University of Westminster and started my surveying degree. And then I've been for a few contractors in my early career. So I worked for a subcontractor that was a specialist in structural renovations. I worked for Waits, I've worked for Shepherds, worked for Wilmot Dixon, worked for Mace. And then 10 years ago, after working on all sorts of different jobs in the industry, I decided to move into the consulting role because I did a postgraduate diploma in law as well. And I quite like that side of the industry. And I decided that I was going to make the plunge and get into quantum expert work. So I joined EC Harris as they were then, who were later bought out by Arcadis. And then our team was 2P'd over to JS Held in 2022, I believe. So there's about 20 of us that came over. And we moved into their construction advisory practice, and we've got a mixture of delay, quantum, architectural, technical experts who basically help people who may have problems on jobs and want to avoid dispute or are in adjudication, arbitration, litigation and what have you. So yeah, quite busy, varied, but I still get to work on some live jobs when there's problems, but also help people when there's issues that they can't avoid going into some sort of formal dispute process.
Yeah, it must be very helpful in your role to have seen both supply chain subcontractor role and main contractor role.
Yeah.
So you've got a fantastic spread of experience there to be able to offer your clients what you're up to at the moment.
Yeah.
The bit you missed out then, Faye, was how you managed to get the freedom of the City of London. I think it's an awesome achievement. How did that happen?
So I joined the Worshipful Company of Arbitrators because that's something else that I'm interested in, and I'm a quantum expert on a couple of arbitrations. So I joined them, and as a livery company, part of that is that you can then get your freedom of the city. So I got that last year. I took my parents with me, which was really cool because they give you, it's actually in a court in London. It's a one-to-one ceremony with whoever your guests are. And basically, yeah, I'm sort of in the records forever now, and it's my bloodline will be able to see them, but nobody else can. It's quite fascinating how it all works.
Yeah.
And then I have got it. I don't know if you can sort of see it in the background. I have got it on the wall there.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a really nice experience. I mean, my dad loved it. I did post a picture on LinkedIn because he was just over the moon, because I sort of blame him for me being here, really. So it felt quite appropriate to have a nice daddy-daughter shot, really.
Well, absolutely. And what father wouldn't be enormously proud of a daughter that's achieved freedom of the city? And is it true that allows you to drive sheep over London Bridge then? Is that one of the...
Yeah, I think I can do that in September. So that will probably be the next one to go for. And I'm sure my dad will want to come to that as well.
Brilliant. Well, let's get down to nitty gritty. we're here to talk about culture and culture change in the industry. I know it's something you've been passionate about over many years. How would you sort of describe the sort of culture in the construction? That's from your perspective. What were sort of the endearing or the less endearing parts of it?
Um, I mean, for me, it was really tough when I started. I had a number of issues, sort of not being wanted on site was one of them, because obviously there were very few women back then. In fact, I don't think I saw any women until I think I joined Waits, who were in a position as a role model, and that was Maria Joyce, and she's still there, funnily enough, and we do
Mhm.
still sort of speak occasionally. So it was very much the only women I saw were the women in the typing pool in the office, or people in the canteen, or administrative. So I was sort of thrust into going out on site into quite a hostile environment, which took quite a thick skin to get through.
Yeah,
And I had issues with, ill-fitting PPE, where I used to get caught on scaffolding all the time because it was, they just sort of shrink it and, here, you have a small one, that will do for you.
yeah.
I often had to be the key holder for the toilet, for example, because if I wasn't, it would end up being used as a store cupboard, and sometimes you couldn't get one and you'd have to like go to a local shop to use the loo. I mean, there was all sorts of issues on some of the jobs I
Mm.
had when I was younger. And I think, what I realized is that it can be a really difficult industry for men as well. So, often long hours, especially in the winter, it can be really, really depressing for people when they're working, particularly out in cold, sort of wet, miserable
Mm.
building site. So I think, the camaraderie side of things is really important for everyone.
Mm.
But I've become probably more passionate as I've got older, when I realized that I was talking to younger women who were having the same issues I had.
Yeah.
And then I've also got extremely passionate about the mental health side of things, because obviously we lose 2 men every working day to suicide in the
Mm.
industry. And I lost my best friend to that. And although he didn't work in the industry, mental health is obviously something that I'm very passionate about. And I think
Mm.
we've got a culture at the moment that isn't particularly supportive of anybody, which is why it needs to improve. So that's sort of where I got on my soapbox almost and decided I needed to do something, because it's very easy for you to move through the industry and do different jobs and keep working on yourself. But I feel like it's really important that I try and make a difference for others. So
Mm.
it led to me, and I know we've spoken about it, I've written a book which is currently going through the copy edit process with the publisher. And it's not just about women and the struggles they have, although it definitely talks about that in a lot of depth. It's also about why we need male allyship, why we need to work together to improve the culture, because at the moment I feel in many parts of the industry it's quite toxic for everybody, and that's got
Mm.
to change.
And so how would you what are the key elements that create that culture, and why are we in this position we're in?
I think there's a few things. I think some of it is there's a lot of expectation on people to perform a certain role in a certain way. So, I've interviewed men in the industry, for example, and they've said that, what we often call banter can actually be quite harmful. So I think of
Mm.
some of the things that I've had in the past, and it can be quite hurtful to men and to women, to anybody who
Yeah.
gets it. So I think you're expected to sort of put up and shut up in many ways, and that
Mm.
actually can be quite difficult for people, particularly if they're sensitive or if they've got stuff going on at home. It can sort of be a culmination of lots of problems there. I think we've got long hours a lot of the time, and
Yeah.
I think that can be difficult. Some parts of the industry people stay away from home, so they may not have support around them. And I think you sort of put it all together with still some quite antiquated ways of working, because we are quite slow to take on innovation in
Mm.
the industry. And it's like a boiling pot for people not being very happy often. And I think it puts pressure on people to pretend. And I think although we're getting better, because you've got Tough to Talk, for example, and you've got all of these things where people are
Yeah.
trying to make it so that it's more open for people to talk, it's still that people are expected to just sort of be quite strong, and you must man up, and it's actually putting pressure on people that shouldn't be there, because things aren't perfect for anybody, and we should all be able to support each other. And I think one of the things that I've sort of come to realise is, and I talk about allyship quite a lot in the book, while we as women need men as allies to help change the culture for us, we also need to be allies to men, because when men enter that sort of fray of standing up against things that have traditionally always happened and some people don't like it, they can get quite a lot of stick as well. So I'm quite hot on, we need to support each other, and it shouldn't be a them and us scenario. This should be, how can we make it better for everybody? And you know, we've got this skills shortage that's been going on for ages. We've got an aging workforce. We've got all of the issues now with, dare I say it, the CSCS card debacle that's causing issues, because you know, you've now got people who haven't done that training and are going to struggle. And it's actually just a melting pot for the industry, not having the people it needs in the future, not training young people so that they can take over. And I you know, you've got this new Labour government who've said we're going to do this many houses, you know, and it's just completely irrational when you look at the numbers we've got in the industry. So we've got to do something to improve that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that last point you make is the statistic always amazes me, is that the last time we did the sort of numbers of houses, 300,000 houses a year, was in the late, I think, in the 80s, and we had more construction bricklayers then, apprentice construction bricklayers, than we've got entire number of apprentices in the industry today. It's going to be a real challenge for us all.
Yeah.
Faye, I was going to ask, you know, you talk about the climate and the conditions we work in being quite tough, and quite often that tough climate that creates sort of that camaraderie, those close-knit communities to be able to deal with the challenges we get. We're desperately short of people as well to go and support those tough communities. How do we go about ensuring that those tough communities actually open up and allow people in, and sort of accommodate the sort of the better diversity of people within the sector, and don't put the sort of the pressures, particularly the mental health pressures, on us that we've got? I mean, how do we go about making sure those people who are already in those tough communities actually are aware of the damage they're causing?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, is, and you've hit on the word there, it's the awareness. And I think one of the things that I've say, and it's funny, I've just written an article where I said it again. I don't think people are bad at heart. And if you look at the scenario with men and women as an example in the industry, I think 99% of men don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to be a horrible person today and I'm going to upset that surveyor on site who's a female. The problem is they don't understand the issues that women face, because we face different issues depending on who we are, obviously. And I've found in my experience, when you bring it into someone's awareness, what the issues are and how I've got different issues to you, it's like a light bulb moment, and someone will go, I never thought of it like that. So I have a real issue with people who just are quite hard, and it's like, oh, it's all men's problem, they're horrible. No, they're not. Most men are really, really lovely. They just don't get it, which is part of the reason I started writing my book and putting some of the experiences women have on a daily basis into it, because I want people to go, okay, now I get it. And one of the guys I interviewed for the book, a guy called Dan Maitland, he's actually in the US. He's a brilliant example of a man who had no clue whatsoever that he was part of the problem. So he works, I think it's the plant industry and construction over there. He went to a seminar, you know, with an attitude of, I'm not going to enjoy this because it's a woman talking about the issues women have. And he actually came away from that and he was a bit like, I'm part of the problem. And it was little things that he was doing, like, you know, expecting the women in the office to do the coffees and the teas for meetings and clear up. And he was like, I just did not realise that I was part of the issue. And then when he did, that enabled him to then start having conversations with male colleagues, and then they learn. It's the ripple effect. So for me, I'm never going to bang a drum and go, all men are bad. You know, there's always going to be some bad men. There's some bad women. You know, some people are just horrible, and that's fine. You can't save everyone or educate everyone, but most people don't get it. The same as I didn't really understand a great deal about the mental health side of things until I started looking at suicide, the statistics in the industry, speaking to men and the issues that they have as well. And I mean, there's people like, I think it's Steve Whittle, Tough to Talk. So, you know, we've got people now who are trying to make it so that men can have those discussions. And, you know, I think there's a guy called Daniele Darker, I hope I got his name right. I spoke to him for the book, and he does things called brave spaces, which allows people, men predominantly, to come together and to talk about the issues they have. And I think one of the things that we as a culture have always done is we've expected men to just put up, shut up, and be strong. And
Yep.
actually, that can cause problems. Some men are great at doing that, and that's fine if that's how they want to do it. But it's also okay to talk, and it's okay to say that actually you're having a bad day, and we should never ever put someone down for that. And I think that is some of the issues that we can have with our culture. If someone, lo and behold, says they're a bit vulnerable, they can get quite a hard time for it. So it's for me, it's an education piece and potentially just a being kind piece.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots to unpack there, Faye, but just before we do that, do you think, sorry, I'll give you a hypothesis. One of the challenges I think we have is we have a very fragmented sector.
Mm-hmm.
We have people running organizations, and generally 95% of our companies employ less than 5 people in the sector. And I worry that with the complexity of construction increasing, particularly with more regulation and less money, actually, let's face it, in the sector, people are less in control of their businesses and their work, and they have to have more eyes in the back of their head to see what's going to come back and bite them. And the pressures that creates, and the need to be able to find every penny from the process, particularly in a fragmented competitive environment, does create some of the behaviours that you're talking about, or gives rise to the pressure to have those behaviours where you're trying to beat the next person because you've got to find some way of getting paid and how you're going to make it work.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit on something that I talk about in the book, and I will bang the drum on this forever. I think because I came from a father who had his own business in the industry, and as a kid, I have very vivid recollections of a 3-month period where things were really tough because he hadn't been paid. I have always been the surveyor who will always pay people fairly. If there's ever a problem, I'm not going to pay someone something, I'll pick the phone up. And I've always trained my surveyors to do the same. Don't leave it till the last minute. Someone needs to know for their cash flow, because most of the industry is SMEs, let's face it.
Absolutely.
And I do have issues with long payment terms that are unreasonable from some contractors, because we do still have that. And just poor payment practices, full stop. Because that puts people under really bad pressure, and these people are going home, they're trying to feed their families, they've got bills to pay, and we know how many go out of business each year. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. So culturally, we need to treat SMEs better as well. And I know there's a guy that I know, Yosef Ewing, who's doing a lot. I think I might have introduced you to have a chat with him.
Yeah, we've had a podcast with Yosef.
Yeah, so he's amazing, and we're very aligned on our values. For me, we need to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And these people, they may be small, they may be one-man bands, but everybody deserves that respect. Everybody should be able to be paid when they're due to be paid. And I think instead of squeezing every last bit out of, money, it should be, where's the best value? How is this going to give the client best value? And having those strong conversations further up the supply chain, and stop squeezing the small guys, because everyone needs to make a living and everyone deserves to go home and be able to eat.
Yeah, and those people, small or large, are all making a valuable contribution to those projects, and that has to be recognised. And I remember my father telling me when we weren't paid, he said, look, I have to do all these things. I have to jump through every hoop that you've created on your contract. The one thing you have to do is pay me on time. It can't be that difficult if I've got to perform all these duties. So, I can remember those conversations really quite vividly, a bit like you and your experiences of not being paid in your family. It's a real challenge.
Yeah.
So do you think if we can get things sort of like project bank accounts that can pay everybody in the supply chain at the same time, regardless of how flush with cash the main contractor is or the tier 1 subcontractors are, would that help people's mental health? Would that be an improvement?
I think it would. I mean, it might not improve mental health completely, because it's not just a payment issue.
It isn't. No, but it's a major plank.
It would certainly reduce the stress. And I think if people knew they were going to be paid regularly throughout the job, and this is bearing in mind, that they haven't caused loads of damage and, defective work and everything else. But if we assume that they've done the right job, they're entitled to be paid, and what we have at the moment is broken, and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily, and I won't say it's tier ones, because they often do things properly and they do pay
Yeah.
people, but the
Yeah.
further you go down that chain, the worse it can get.
Mm.
And for me, that's where we've got to embed the culture, because you look at the tier ones, tier twos, they've got the money to plow into this stuff, so they can work on culture, they can work on
Yeah.
support, mental health, first aiders, all these other things. But the further you go down, the less money there is for these
Yeah.
companies to be able to put into those things. So, you know, one of the things I sort of talk about in the book is, you know, what can we do differently, and how can we support people further down that supply
Mm.
chain? Because for me, if they can't afford to do something that could help them, we've got cash pots surely in bigger contractors on big jobs where they've got social, you know, sustainability to think about. Get these people involved. You know, not everything has to be money for you to do something. Why not just try and help people? I really just, I think we've got a broken bit in the industry sometimes where everything's about money, but actually if you get people happier, they work better, they're more
Yeah.
productive. So, you know, whereas tier ones and tier twos potentially can afford to do this stuff for their staff, why not just get the whole site involved? Do a
Yeah.
few of these things so that everybody can do it. And I know some do that, but I feel like it's something really that we should be pushing for the whole industry to do, because if we care more about our people that are working, and it goes right down to that one person who might be self-employed, then everything will, it will start to improve, because the culture will then, it will flow all the way, and
Yeah.
you'll get much more out of people. And
Yeah.
I think that's really where we're quite short-sighted sometimes.
It's sad, isn't it? Because we all have experiences of the best jobs we ever worked on, and the best jobs we ever worked on is where everybody's content or happy or working
Yeah,
well, and the jobs work well, and the problems that come up people resolve automatically without having to think about everything else. And that's, you know, you're quite right. A happy site is a productive site, and
yeah,
that's really quite important. I was going to move on to sort of just pick up some of the last issues on sexism in the industry. I mean, it's improved in my tenure in the industry. It's improved immeasurably. Um, we talked around about just a lack of awareness.
mm,
Um, do we think we've gone far enough in you know in the overt sexism that we've got? And you know, I mentioned in the intro that we've got a very overtly masculine president in the United States now.
yeah.
Do you think that's going to sort of alter the course of that we've been going down over the last sort of 20 years here in the UK, or is that something that we can safely ignore?
Do you know what? I'd love to say we can safely ignore it, but I don't know if you watched Panorama last night. I feel like it's almost like there's been a lot of progress and the patriarchy is currently fighting back. That's the only way
Right,
I can
okay.
put it. That's what I feel like. And I mean, the Trump thing, I just had no words. You know, I just, some of the things that we've seen on the news and social media the last sort of couple of weeks, they're just horrifying. And what scares me is we've made a lot of progress to try and improve things. Are we now going to take a massive step back? I really hope not. And I will continue to fight for everybody to work together to improve it for everyone. And I think that's the only way it's going to work. It has to be that we work together to improve it for everyone, because this isn't me banging the drum just to make it better for women in the industry. This is me banging the drum to make it better for everyone,
Yeah,
because if you concentrate on just one group, it's never going to improve. And you know, these people that we see in these positions of power that, you know, admit freely the way they treat women and think that's okay, what does that say to others? I find that quite scary, and I don't want young people to sort of look up to that and think, oh, you know, there's something to aspire to. It's frightening, really. I would rather we look to try and actually just be kind to each other, treat each other with respect, you know, do your job and enjoy doing it, be able to enjoy doing it, because you're not under ridiculous pressure. You know, look, I love it when you drive past a job that you've been on. You know, I've done sort of all sorts, stadiums, I
yeah,
was involved at Wimbledon, I've done hospitals, offices, houses, and you drive past them and you're like, wow, I was involved in that, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And it's an industry that can give you so much. So I don't want it going backwards to where it was 30 years ago when I started. You know, we go on, I went on I think it was a Berkeley Homes job a few years ago, and I was just like, wow, the site offices were amazing, the facilities were brilliant. I was
Yeah.
like, God, I never had this. I remember being in a rubbish old site office, and I had like the little fan heater on my feet all winter because I was freezing, and you know, out there trudging around in my little rigger boots that were too big for me with 3 pairs of socks on. It's you know, it is thankfully a lot
Yeah.
better, but I still think the dynamics politically do scare me, because I just think there is a lot of pushback, unfortunately, and I think that's probably from a very small percentage of people who have got all the money and don't work like the rest of us and don't sort of live in the real world, I suppose.
Mm. Do you think we've got the leadership to counteract that new political class or not?
When you say leadership, do you mean in the industry
I
or
mean, in the industry leadership. I'm sorry. The
Yeah, I think in the industry, I think we've got a lot of leaders who really do want to make a difference and they do want to improve the industry. But I think as much as we've got good leaders, we also need clients who think that way as well, because
yeah,
you've still got the cheapest is best brigade, unfortunately. And until we educate them that actually that isn't always the case, sometimes actually you need to spend a bit more and you get best value. You'll get the job done quicker with the right people, with the right materials. You know, we're still very much in an industry which I see sometimes on disputes where it's value engineered to the nth degree,
yeah,
and it's all about money, and it doesn't necessarily give people what they want at the end of the day. And you know, I think there's a big mindset change that needs to come to improve things. So there are leaders that are doing really good work. I mean, you know, I had I always look at weights because I worked there for a while, and I've known Stefan Battle, who's their MD of construction now for more years than I care to remember. And he was a beta reader for my book, funnily enough. And he was
uh,
like, oh my God, he was like, that really shocked me. But actually, it's really inclusive and it's about what we can do to make it better and improve things for the industry. So there are leaders who are very passionate out there. He's a great ally. He works with Michaela Wayne on the Women in
yeah,
Construction Award. You know, you've got some
yeah.
really good people doing good things. So I think we do have it, but I think it's not just them at the top of tier ones that can make the difference. We
No.
need everybody to get on that train, so to speak.
Mm. Good. Yeah. No, I think you're right, and I think it is. It's that sort of grassroots movement that we have to try and unlock.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day, it's actually going to improve the one thing we're all chasing, which is productivity. We have
yeah,
to, if we get the productivity right and we reduce the risks by having the right people delivering the right quality and the right time, then everybody's jobs are going to get easier, and we might actually start making some money in this game. Which,
but we also need to think differently. So if I look at bricklayers as an example, if you've got a gang and you pay them based on what they can do in a day, rather than expecting them to be there between 6 or 7 and like 6 p.m., if they were paid on a rate for how much they can do in a day, they'd probably be gone by 2 o'clock because they would work really, really hard. But people don't think like that. And it's like crane drivers. You expect them to sit there for sometimes 10, 12 hours a day because a cement lorry's late. Then you wonder why they get musculoskeletal problems,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they've just been
yeah,
sat in a cab all that time. Do a split shift. Just think about doing things differently. That then enables them, if they want to do another job or have caring responsibilities, and it will support their sort of well-being as well. I think we're just really short-sighted. We don't think enough about what we can do differently, and some of it is incredibly simple.
mm. I think you're right, and the response to that, that life's just too complicated already, is not really acceptable. When you look at the downside of getting the productivity wrong, or an accident happening because people are too tired, or have people harming themselves that they then can't
Yeah,
produce, and that it's a terrible situation to be in. It
yeah.
really is. I was going to just move on a little bit, just looking at bringing new people into the sector. You talked about bringing new people into the sector and trying to make sure that they've got a much better start in the industry than you were put through.
Mhm.
Do you think we've got that right as well? Because I've interviewed recently some people from the FE sector, Polly Harrow, who represents FE students to Department for Education. And she's really concerned that we've got a widening gulf between what happens in education and what the expectations are for us in industry. Do you think we need to do some more work on this, or to try and find out how we can ease that transition from one to the other?
I think there's problems at both ends of the scale. So I think when I go into schools, colleges, and universities, and I think schools I'll talk about first, girls particularly will already think by the age of 6 that they're not going to be any good at STEM subjects because of some of the surroundings they're in and
Yeah,
so one of the people that I really like working with, and she does a lot, is STEMazing Alex. So she
yeah.
goes into primary schools and they do like experiments with kids and show them all of the opportunities that there are so that we can get rid of some of that stereotype that comes into your brain very young, because kids are like sponges. So some of it is industry needs to get into kids younger so that we can talk to them about the opportunities that are available
Yep.
for them and the industry, because they just don't know. But then
No.
when you go to secondary schools and colleges and stuff, the amount of times I've gone in and done a talk to students and I've spoken about trade roles, engineering roles, architectural, surveying, that, because let's face it, it is epic what you can do in the industry. You can do
Mm.
anything. And they go, oh, I didn't know you could do all that. So there's a really big education piece
Yeah, yeah.
also for careers people, because they don't realise what the industry has to offer. There's still, I suppose, a stereotypical building must be a sort of like a dirty builder on site covered in mud. And they don't realise there's so many opportunities for people to do stuff. You may never even step foot on a site, some of the roles that we can offer.
Mm.
And the more that we get the AI situation and the sort of off-site manufacturing and everything like that, the more opportunities there are. But we have to get in and tell them that they're there. But then conversely, and the reason that I started writing the book is I cannot keep going into schools and getting people to come into the industry if I don't make it better further up the line, because we've got a massive dropout rate for women particularly, and it's between the ages of sort of 41 and 46 on the
Is
RICS
it?
stats. So
Gosh, okay.
RICS stats show that male surveyors have the average, I think it's 28 years of membership versus 16 for women. And there's a number of reasons for that. And it isn't just that they've gone off and had babies. Some of it is other caring roles. It might be that it's just too difficult. And I've interviewed, I think it's over 1,300 women in the last sort of couple of years for the book. And some of them have left the industry, unfortunately, because it was too difficult. It might have
Yeah.
been they wanted a bit more flexibility after they'd had kids. Doesn't mean you can't do the job. It just means we need to do it slightly differently.
Yeah.
And some contractors they were involved in some research on flexible working and can it work on site, and they proved yes it can.
Oh,
So
brilliant. Yeah.
there are things we can do, but it's no good just going into schools and going, yeah, come into the industry, it's really great, there's all this to offer, if you don't give them a safe culture where actually they're going to be nurtured, supported, helped to grow, because people will always want to progress, and just given all those opportunities. I don't want people coming in and then feeling the same as some of the people we've already got in, because
Mm.
that's why we've got a dropout rate. It's why we've got the skills shortage.
Yeah. I mean, two things there. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Retention is going to be a key issue for all of us. A bird in the hand is always worth several in the bush.
Yeah.
And if we've got those people in the industry, we have to find ways of keeping them and of giving them what they need to stay in the sector. We can just simply can't afford to lose people we've paid to train
Yeah.
and the skills that we have. It's absolutely ludicrous. Conversely, I mean, a short story. We did a PFI school in Hereford well over 20 years ago now, and at the time, Herefordshire had the highest incidence of teenage pregnancy in the country, and the women, and particularly young schoolgirls, had a very low expectation or aspirations. And Hereford's a long way from there's very little motorway, and it's sort of stuck out on the edge of England. Um, and I was asked to run an all women day as part of the program, and of course we put in a team of all the brightest and best women involved in the project. So we had architects, we had engineers, we had quality designers, we had a really great range of very high powered women went into this school. And of course, I wasn't invited, but I got a nice little thank you letter from the headmistress saying thank you very much. And I said, well, that's another tick in the box, and done that, move on. But I got a call 18 months later in August from the headmistress. I thought, that's strange. I don't normally get a call while I'm on holiday from. And she's phoning, said, Mark, I'm just phoning because we've just had our school results, our exam results for the first time ever, the girls have beaten the boys at GCSEs, and they've beaten them by a country mile. It's not a small aberration. It's a massive increase. And my senior team and I have been sitting here wondering what on earth, we've done differently to get this success. And he says, we've got the same students from the same families with the same teachers in the same school. And the only thing we can put it down to is your bunch of women that you sent in to demonstrate that there was a reason why you need to be successful at school. And she said, I just wanted to phone you up and let you know, and thank you. And my response was, well, quite frankly, if it's that easy, and the opportunity we can unlock in our sector is just enormous. We ought to be doing this every day of the week, because if, to have the effect on those sort of students, it will be life changing for them.
Yeah.
And that's yeah. So I'm meant to be interviewing you, Faye, not you the other way around.
I love that.
It's a story that it's was one of the happiest days in my construction career, is looking at what we can do for people who are fundamentally disadvantaged or unaware of what the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've talked sort of a bit about leadership and culture change, and I just wondered, perhaps bringing back onto your experiences, do you think there's a lot of difference across the world? Because I know you operate overseas as well as here in the UK. Do you think we've got things right here in the UK compared to the rest of the world, or is there much we can learn from overseas?
I mean, I think everywhere has similar issues, some more pronounced depending on the culture, obviously, because some cultures don't embrace potentially having women on site, for example. But I mean, I think everywhere's sort of on a par.
Right.
But
Okay.
one of the places that I think is really good to look at maybe doing things differently, it's places like Dubai, where they do split shift working and stuff like that. So there's some really good things we could learn from places like that. And I mean, you do get that in America in some places as well, and even Australia, actually. So I think we're a little bit slow. And I think what happens with us in the UK, probably because we do have quite a long, miserable winter. Oh, how are we going to do a split shift then? Whereas Dubai's always sunny, so of course it's easier for them to do it. It's almost like we go, oh, it's in the too difficult box.
Yeah.
And I think rather than sort of thinking, oh, can we do it like them? It's almost us sitting here and going, what can we do that makes it better? So I always think of, I spoke to Lee Marley, so Lee Marley Brickwork, for the book. So I've known him since I was 18. It's quite scary because I think he did the work when I was way back when. And he's obviously opened up his own college to train the apprentices, because he was like, they're not necessarily getting the training that I want them to. I want them to be job ready. So he's done that to really make a difference. So it almost takes people in the industry to go, okay, right, how can I do something and actually be really brave to do it? And I feel like if we can get enough of those people together to think differently, we will create different shift patterns, we will create better cultures, and we will make it so that we don't have supply chain that treats others as it goes down the line worse and worse and worse. It has to come from the top. And we need to bring kids in, and it's great, there's lots of us now that go into schools and talk about all the opportunities, but we also need people that are in the industry to be treated well and to not be in a toxic culture as well. So I feel like it comes from everywhere. It's top down, bottom up, and it's really, we need some really unusual, different thinking. And I think it's very easy for everyone to be stuck in the same way. The crane driver is going to be in his cab, he's going to be in there for 9-10 hours, cement lorry's late, he can't come down, tough. Well, that's why a number of female crane drivers have left the industry, because they can't cope with, the fact that they don't get to see anyone, because that's what happens basically. All they do is they're there on their own all day, and doing things to your body that you're meant to get up and walk around. We're not meant to just be stagnant creatures sat in a chair. So it really does take us just thinking a bit differently. And we've got so many people in the industry who've got so much creativity. We could really do so much with that.
Well, let me ask a different question, Faye. Do you, in your position advising companies and boards, do you ever ask to see their corporate risk register? Does management of staff or availability of skills feature on those risk registers?
To be fair, I don't really have those conversations because I'm often, it will be like, oh, we've got an adjudication, can you help us?
No, I get that,
Um,
but you're busy writing your book and investigating and talking to all these
I mean,
people.
I suppose I've looked at that stuff for the book, and I know that there's some companies that are way better than others. One of the things that is my bugbear is DEI initiatives where they post about it, but actually they're not doing it.
Yeah,
And I do think there's a lot of lip service and tick boxes that happen. And I think that's part of the problem we have. And I almost feel like government could maybe help that by making it a more measurable thing for companies to
yeah,
do. You know, we've got the sort of, you know, the gender pay gap, for example, and we've got sustainability goals, but why are we not bringing more of that in so that we
yeah,
can actually have that and it's transparent?
yeah. Well, they might come back to government. I mean, so the Bartlett did a very interesting piece of work saying that the challenge in the UK is that we focus on projects. So all our
Yeah.
emphasis is on projects. So we focus we have a project and we put all our best minds and companies onto focusing on how we're going to solve that project problem. Whereas quite often in the rest of the world, they focus on the companies. And so the company processes are made to hone, and if they get the companies right, then the projects will fall into line. But they focus on the company processes, and I wonder whether there's an opportunity to really drive, particularly the EDI and the skills issues at board level within the companies, so they're looking at from a corporate perspective and not just as a project perspective. So, you know, to take your crane driver, if corporately they said we need to provide breaks for no longer than 6 hour shifts for crane drivers, it wouldn't be left to the project scenario where they say where it's just in the too difficult box. You know, if
Yeah.
there was I think that applies to a great many things in the UK. Is that if we
Yeah.
could get corporately looking at some of these issues rather than project based, actually we could change the culture quite rapidly.
And I think some of the tier ones are doing that.
Yeah,
I think
I'd
we
agree.
can see that on some of the,
Yeah,
but the problem is they can do all they like, but as you go down and filter down through the smaller and smaller SMEs, how easy is that for them to do? If
yeah,
you've got, you know, like you say, a 5-person really small company, they might worry if you say, oh, we're only going to do a 6-hour shift. Am I still
yeah,
going to get the same amount of money? Can I still pay the mortgage at the end of the month? It's about having that understanding that a 6-hour shift doesn't mean you get paid less,
yeah, yeah,
because I think that's the first thing that comes into people's brains straight away. And it's
yeah,
understandable, but the productivity will go up. So why should they be paid less? Do you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
just trying to get that different way of thinking.
yeah,
And I think for site work particularly, people can struggle to see that.
yeah.
Very easy with office work, homework, and all that sort of stuff. But when you're on site and you've got to actually do stuff to make the job get built, I think that's where it gets awkward.
Yes, challenging. Well, it is,
Yeah.
and you can see productivity. A crane driver's productivity is very much limited to the productivity down below them, and that's
Yeah.
that's always going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
You mentioned government there, Faye. We talked around about the need for clients to be involved in this process and insisting on various bits and pieces. Do you think government? I mean, how should government respond? Do we need to attach this into a department, or do we need to try and get some cross-departmental agreement for tackling these issues?
I mean, there's a lot of things that do need to come, I think, from government, because it would make the industry I have to change. I suppose that's
Yeah,
where
yeah,
some of that comes from. And I mean, the only thing I can use as an example really is what happened out of Grenfell. So a lot of the projects I deal with are cladding remedial works that have obviously come off the back of that. And obviously,
yeah,
I don't know if you've read the reports. I mean, they're quite harrowing. I did spend a weekend reading them,
yeah,
and it why does it take that for change to happen, I suppose, is
yeah,
my question. And I think there's things that have come out of that which the government will then make changes to improve industry, to make sure that we are measured better, to make sure that, you know, all of these companies that ignored all the problems can't do it. But I was at a seminar last week at Kennedy's Lawyers, and what I found really shocking was that they reckon nobody's probably going to get charged until 2030. And I was like, hang on a minute, that happened in 2017. So when it comes to government, I suppose one of my issues is it shouldn't take that long for
no,
people to get
no,
justice. And if it takes that long for that to happen, when we've already had 2 inquiry sort of documents, how do we make change happen? And
Just
I think,
yeah,
you
justice
know,
delayed is justice denied in many respects.
yeah, and
And
then when
that's
the next government comes in, are they just going to throw it all out the window? So, I mean, I almost feel like we probably do need some legislation that would help create change, but we need some really bright minds to try and say what that needs to be and then go to government with it, I think,
yeah, yeah, I
because they're
agree
not
with
going to
that.
do it on their own.
No, go with solutions, not answers, not problems, is
Yeah,
generally the mantra for government, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Faye, we've had a really good canter through some of the experiences you've got and some of the lessons you've got for us all. Do you want to just sort of tell us sort of what the signs of hope are, or what you think you'd like, what are the easy things we ought to be doing, and sort of what's the call to arms might be for the industry as a whole? And it might be go to government and say, let's get a coordinated approach. But what would you like to see if you waved your magic wand?
I think one of the first things I'd like to see is I'd like to see that the conditions for people working are improved, because that would be a big tick in the box for me, because and it's not on big jobs, they're often really, really well sort of suited, good welfare
Yeah.
facilities, but if we're going to keep having people put into positions where they aren't looked after and feeling like they're looked after, that doesn't help their well-being. So for me, a big part of it is making sure that everyone's well-being all through the supply chain is thought about carefully, so that we do look after them. I think there is a lot of signs of young people want to get into the industry, which is really, really
Yeah,
good. And I think there's
yeah,
some great schemes out there that will offer them apprenticeships. And I think it's really important that we use the older people in the workforce to train those people, because we're going to lose a lot of skills in the next sort of 5-10 years with the retiree people coming up.
yeah,
And we need to get those skills. And that's why the CSCS thing bothers me, because it's like we're going to lose a load of people straight off a cliff because they haven't done that. And that for me is really wrong. We should be using all of their knowledge and their skills to teach the younger generation.
yeah.
But I think the signs of hope for me is, I think there's a lot of things that will come in with AI. I think
Hmm.
that's going to really help with some of the picking up of problems at an early stage. For example, we already know you
Yep.
can go around with the thing on your site hat and you can do your valuation a lot quicker. So there's a lot of things that will make the industry more robust and potentially save
Hmm.
money, which can then hopefully be used to improve things further down the supply chain, not
I hope
just go
so.
into
Yeah,
someone's pocket.
yeah.
And I think really from my perspective, I want people that do care to make the ripple. I want people to go out and have those conversations that are a bit uncomfortable, and for other people to go, I didn't know that was a problem, and just
Mhm.
think a little bit differently when they move forward, because that's how change happens. It isn't just going to come from government or from
No,
leaders. We can all create change. And
yeah.
sometimes it will just be one little epiphany like Dan had that I spoke about earlier. And that has filtered through all of the men in his company and many other men that they've had conversations with. So I think that's how change happens. We can't
Mhm.
we can't all change everything, but we can all make change happen.
Yeah, yeah. We are all leaders, aren't we, in terms of
Yeah,
change, and
yeah,
we're all responsible.
yeah.
Faye, that's been a really great conversation and really great experience, and demonstrating why the importance of EDI and the importance of leadership in changing the role and the culture in the industry. So thank you very much for your time, and wish you every success. My last question is, we haven't heard what the title of your book is yet. So what's it
Oh, okay.
called?
So it's called Building Women: How Everyone in Construction Can Win.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I shall make sure that everybody's looking out for it, and I'm sure it'll be promoted widely on LinkedIn when it comes out. So we hope all our listeners will be able to look out for it and purchase a copy. But thank you very
Thank
much for your
you.
time today. It's been great talking to you.
Lovely. Thanks so much.